Dramatic surge in U.S. coastal flooding is projected to start in about 10 years, around 2030, and we didn't know it, but we're learning from this now that the moon has cycles just like the sun has cycles, and the moon has cycles every 18.6 years. High tides that could be higher than normal. Besides the fact that we have climate change, in the mid-2030s, every U.S. coast will experience rapidly increasing high tide floods when a lunar cycle will cause rising sea levels and also, of course, caused by climate change. Now, there are areas, for example, around Manhattan, unfortunately, that even with a strong rain flood normally. It's not a happy occasion, but that's what happens. Now, high tide floods, called nuisance floods or sunny day floods, familiar problems in many cities and especially on the U.S. Atlantic and Gulf coasts. The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, reported a total of more than 600 such floods in the year 2019. Starting in mid-2030s, though, the alignment of rising sea levels with a lunar cycle could cause coastal cities all around the U.S. to begin a decade of dramatic increases in flood numbers. This is according to the first study that takes into account all known oceanic and as well as astronomical causes for floods. We know that we have high tides twice a day in the Northern Hemisphere especially. We see huge differences. 6 feet, 9 feet differences. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. And of course, the high tides the levels are lower when you're coming closer towards the equator, as we know. So, led by members of NASA Sea Level Change Science Team from University of Hawaii, this new study reveals high tides will exceed the known flooding thresholds around the country even more often. And the floods will sometimes occur in clusters lasting months or longer, depending on the positions of the moon, earth, and the sun. Now, when the moon and earth line up in specific ways with each other and the sun, the resulting gravitational pull and the ocean's corresponding response may leave city dwellers coped with flooding every day or two, they said. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson says, low-lying areas near sea level are increasingly at risk and suffering due to the increased flooding and will only get worse. The combination of the moon's gravitational pull, rising sea levels, climate change will continue to exacerbate coastal flooding on our coastlines and across the world as well. NASA's Sea Level Change Team is providing crucial information so that we can plan, project, and prevent damage to the environment and people's livelihoods affected by flooding. Well, that's only going to happen if they make flood walls, right? And that's going to cost billions and billions of dollars. Now, we know that Governor Cuomo has stated that he has to push out, I don't know how many billions, to protect Lower Manhattan, the Wall Street area of flooding, and how are they going to do this? New Jersey, Delaware, all around the East Coast. Look what's happening to Florida every time. You know, this is going to be a very significant problem, and they have to plan on constructing some kind of protection. Now, Bill Nelson of NASA went on to say it's an accumulated effect over time that will have an impact. And also Phil Thompson, assistant professor, University of Hawaii, lead author of the study, said, and he pointed out that high tide floods involve a small amount of water compared to hurricane storm surges, and there's a tendency to view them as less significant problems overall. But he says if it floods 10 to 15 times a month, a business cannot keep operating with its parking lot underwater. People lose their jobs because they can't get to work. Seeping cesspools become a public health issue. So why will cities on these widely separated coastlines begin to experience higher rates of flooding? And this is what they take into account concerning the moon. The main reason is a regular wobble in the moon's orbit that takes 18.6 years to complete. There's nothing new or dangerous about the moon's wobble. It was first reported, though, in 1728. What's new is how one of the wobble's effects on the moon's gravitational pull, the main cause of Earth's tides, will combine with rising sea levels resulting from the planet's climate change and warming. And now, of course, the wobble of the moon was taken into account, and we read this in one of the past recent videos I did on the Antikythera device, the mechanism. They even took into account the wobble of the moon, which we only figured out in 1728. Can you imagine? And they even at any point in time show you how far Venus is from Earth and the Sun at any point of its rotation. This is amazing. Why did they do that? Anyway, that's still an enigma in our minds, isn't it? Now, in half the moon's 18.6-year cycle, scientists are saying Earth's regular daily tides are suppressed. High tides are lower than normal, low tides are higher than normal, and the other half of the cycle tides are amplified. High tides get higher, low tides get lower. Global sea level rise pushes high tides in only one direction, higher. So half of the 18.6-year lunar cycle counteracts the effect of sea level rise on high tides, and the other half increases the effect. The moon is the tide amplifier part of its cycle now, but along most U.S. coastlines, sea levels have not risen so much that even with this lunar assist, high tides regularly top flooded thresholds. It will be a different story next time the cycle comes around to make tides higher in the mid-2030s. Global sea level rise will have been at work for another decade. Higher seas amplified by the lunar cycle will cause a leap in flood numbers on almost all U.S. mainland coasts from Hawaii, Guam, and only far northern coastlines, including Alaska, will be spared for another decade or longer because these land areas are rising due to, of course, the inflating of the volcanoes under Alaska. As we know, Alaska has a lot of volcanoes. The Aleutian Islands are all volcanic, and that's increasing. It's being lifted there. The deformation is causing an uplift because of the magma underneath, which of course causes the sea level to look lower. So the researchers are uncovering these tipping points in flooding numbers by studying 89 tide gauge locations in every coastal U.S. state and territory but Alaska. They created new statistical work mapping NOAA's widely used sea level rise scenarios and flooding thresholds. They projected results to up to 2080. Now, Ben Hamilton of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in South California, co-author of the paper, he notes that the findings of this study are a vital resource for coastal urban planners who may be focused on preparing for extreme events rather than more high tide floods. So what do they have to do? Obviously, they have to put in a lot of money to construct protection for all these coastal cities. Not just in the United States, but you can imagine Paris, London. You know what strange thing happens in London. Like we have our Cape Cod houses, right? You have the basement, the ground floor, and the first floor with bedrooms, and they're all row houses and all attached. Well, we have stairs going up to the ground floor, okay? Well, in England, they have no basement. Most houses don't have basements. And the ground floor is just half a step off the street. Half a step off the street. I don't know why they do that. But you know, when the street floods, you're going to have your ground level house flooded as well. And it's a It's a problem. At least if they had basements, you have a stoop. The stoop would be about 5 or 6 steps above the street level, the sidewalk level. So at least you don't, at most your basement could get flooded, but at least your ground floor is dry. What can I tell you? Okay, so this is a big problem, obviously, and this study, of course, has to do, this is from Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and it's on SciTech Daily, and this is all the information coming from information having to do with the moon cycles, which was just found out in 1758 or so. Okay, so that it's a relatively new type of a statistic that they put into these figures that they come up with. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support.